Hey everybody, welcome back. This is going to be part 6 of What If Luffy Had the Storm Fruit. So, without any intros or anything of that sort, let's just jump right into the what if, right into part 6. And so we see the Straw Hat crew, or the Storm Pirate crew, pulling up to Little Garden. As they see, and basically as they see it, they're wondering why it's called that. Everything looks massive. There are massive trees, massive plants, and they see a massive tiger that's limping around the shore of the island. As they look at it, it would suddenly fall over dead. Everybody would be a little bit freaked out by this scene, knowing exactly how big that thing was, while Luffy would just be thinking that, that seems pretty normal to me, because, where he grew up, that was basically the normal size of a tiger for him. But the rest of the crew would basically be extremely fearful of this. Luffy, looking over at his crew, would say, "Alright, it's time for an adventure." And of course, Nami would be freaking out, telling him that they can't just leave anywhere, can't they just stay on the ship until the log pose resets, and Luffy would say, "We don't even know how long that's gonna take. It could be hours, days, months, it could even be a year, that from what we've heard from Crocus, so we might as well explore. Maybe we'll find some people who actually know how long it is, or maybe we could find some people who did not really survive on the island and take their log pose." Thinking that that did make at least a little bit of sense coming from him, she would nod reluctantly, and basically Luffy would tell Sanji to kick him up basically a little bit of lunch, or a little box of lunch, to be able to take out with him. Sanji would agree to this, and this is when Vivi would come out and say that she actually wants to go with him. Luffy, agreeing to this rather easily, would simply nod and say, yeah, she can come as well, and they would set off on the island of Little Garden. As they're exploring, Luffy comes across something very different from what he was expecting. It's a dinosaur. And, of course, with its giant neck, Luffy decides he wants to ride it, and he jumps up to the top of it and is looking out over the island. He's simply sitting on its head, trying to get its attention, trying to talk to it, and eventually he uses his Conqueror's Haki and is trying to communicate with the creature. He can somewhat do it, but the creature isn't really that intelligent and would simply try to eat him, but Luffy would simply send a bolt of lightning through its head and kill it, and would basically be like, well, that's gonna feed us for a really long time. And this is where a giant axe would have cut the creature in half, not really realizing that it was already dead. Looking up at the giant figure in front of him, Luffy would look at Dory, I think is what his name is. I can't remember if it's Dory or Broggy that they met. It doesn't really make a difference, to be honest. And so, we see him invite them out for some lunch to his camp. Luffy would agree to this easily, being able to sense his emotions and everything of that sort because of his Haki, and he would realize that he doesn't really mean them any harm. So, taking Vivi and Karoo, who was out unconscious at this point because of the giant man in front of them, they would go to his camp that he had. He would be cooking some of the giant dinosaur over a campfire as they're sharing stories and talking to one another. He would ask exactly why he's even on this island, and he would get the explanation that he has been here for over 100 years by this point, and they've just been having fun fighting. Or not even fun, but they've been basically trying to settle a difference, or a difference of opinion that they have had in the Giants, because that's kind of how they settle things. And their god would basically make the winner be the one that was right. But neither of them have won so far, and it's just been a bunch of draws. Luffy would nod at this, while Vivi would be wondering why somebody could even possibly fight that long, and wondered if they hated each other that much, but of course it's not really what's going on here. But before Vivi could, voice this question, the volcano would go off. And of course, this would be their signal for another battle. Standing up and grabbing his massive axe, or sword, I can't remember, he would basically begin to walk out towards the center of the island, where they see another massive figure of a giant. They would begin their duel, and of course would be completely evenly matched. And after coming to a draw, with Usopp in the background watching with stars in his eyes, saying that this is exactly what he wants to be, exactly what it means to be a true warrior of the sea, he would basically be having that moment to himself, basically. And so, after returning, Luffy, in the meantime, would sense something odd. He realizes that his crew and these basically giants would not be the only ones on the island, as his eyes would shine red with the glint of observation hockey, and he would realize that somebody else was here. And it, of course, would not be Mr. 5 or Miss Valentine, because they're kind of both dead. So, we see Mr. 3 standing in the background, observing the crew and trying to figure out what the best move would be in this situation. Because he knows that he probably doesn't really stand that much of a chance against somebody with a 100 million berry bounty, let alone with a Logia fruit just like I guess he wouldn't really know, but just like Crocodile, as we know. And so, as he'd be wondering this is where he senses a little bit of a shock next to him. And this is, of course, Luffy appearing in a lightning bolt, and he's standing next to him and looking over at Nami in the same direction that he is looking. He asks what exactly he's doing over here. Getting completely shocked by this, he looks over at Luffy, and he really doesn't know what he's going to do in this situation, and doesn't know if he should start trying to fight, try to flee, try to explain himself in a way that would make it so he doesn't kill him instantly. As these different thoughts are going through his head, Luffy would be looking at the top of his head, which of course has a 3 on it, and he asks, "Are you Mr. 3? Having a cold sweat running down his face at this point, he would say, yeah, I'm Mr. 3, knowing that he can't really lie in this situation because it's kind of obvious with how he looks and everything. And Luffy would ask him if he knows who his boss is. Of course, Luffy knows at this point because Vivi accidentally, I don't really know, made a little bit of a mistake and told everybody who the boss was, which is of course Crocodile. And Mr. 3 would say, of course not. Nobody in their organization knows who each other are, basically. Their organization is completely about secrets. Luffy would seemingly nod at this and asks if he can contact his boss. Of course, Mr. 3 would nod as he pulls out his Den Den Mushi, and Luffy would call Crocodile over the phone. Or over the Den Den Mushi. I don't really know how to describe those. They're basically a phone, but not really. They're communication device, as people would put it. But as he hits the call button, or the call snail, whatever, I don't know exactly, but as he hits the communication device to, communicate with Crocodile, Crocodile would answer on the other end of the line. The bero, 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 that noise. And of course, after answering, he would ask for a report on the situation. Luffy would answer him instead of Mr. 3 and say, "This is Monkey D. Luffy. You're speaking to Crocodile?" Mr. 3, getting shocked by this, now realizing that he knows the identity of the boss, would go completely silent, not wanting Crocodile to know that he is standing right next to Luffy and heard this, piece of information, would be just completely silent with a cold sweat running down his head, while Crocodile would smile and say, "You know a lot more than you let on. You're kind of a smart one, aren't you? How about we make some kind of a deal? Because what kind of pirate doesn't want power?" Luffy would simply say that he's not going to be working with somebody as scummy as him and somebody who's a fake pirate like him. Crocodile would, of course, be pissed off by this and would say that, well, then they have time to prepare for him, and he should not have called him like this and basically declared war on somebody as powerful and as influential as him. Luffy would chuckle and would simply say that he doesn't really care who Crocodile is, where he came from, who he's working for, or anything of that sort. He simply is going to kill him when he sees him. With that, he would end the call and look over at Mr. 3 and ask him if he has a log pose for Alabasta. Of course, Mr. 3 would be sweating at this point because he knows he does have it, and he also knows he probably shouldn't lie, but he doesn't know how he's going to get back without it. Luffy, seeing this cold sweat running down his head, would realize that he indeed does, and would simply knock him out and, start rifling through his different belongings. After finding an eternal pose to Alabasta, he would grab it and decide to take it back over to his one member of his crew. And I just realized I said Nami earlier he was looking at, but it's actually Vivi. And so he would return back over as he returns at around the same time the giant would. And so, they would begin having a conversation about what exactly is going on, why they're here, and everything of that sort, and who Vivi is. And Luffy, at this point, would basically mention the fact that he actually just got an eternal pose to Alabasta, and so they decide that after visiting around for a little bit longer, and, having a little bit more of a chat, that they were going to head out after not too long. And so, heading back to their ship, they would do exactly that. They would begin sailing away from the island, and the giants from either side of the shoreline would basically yell at them that no matter what happens, continue to sail forward, and do not deviate from that path. Trusting them at this point, Luffy would simply nod and tell the rest of his crew to continue to go forward, as a massive Sea King would rise up from the water. After entering its mouth, it would get completely chopped into pieces as they would sail through it because of the two giants that would basically just use their giant weapons to slash downward, sending a flying, cut in that direction. And of course, their blades would shatter at this point, and they realized that they should probably try to get off this island now that they can't really fight anymore. And of course, this was a sign from their god that maybe both of them were somehow right. And so, they sail off towards Alabasta. However, something would come up that is rather urgent for the rest of the crew. This would of course be Nami coming down with a sickness. This, of course, would be a very bad thing for the rest of the crew, because she is like their navigator and the only one who really knows how to do everything. Like, Luffy can follow the compass at this point, or not the compass, but the log pose. But he also knows that whatever Nami has might be bad, and they need to get her somewhere where she can basically be safer, where she can get the treatment that she needs. And this is where Vivi comes with the information that there is a kingdom nearby that is said to have the best doctors in the world. And this is, of course, the Drum Kingdom. And so, using basically the direction that their log pose is heading, and knowing that they need to head in a certain direction from that, they would begin to sail towards the Drum Kingdom. And this is where we see the, I guess you could say, the introduction of Wapol and his men, as we see a man seemingly standing on top of the water, just casually talking and, having a little bit of a chat with the crew, until their massive submarine ship, whatever it is, basically rises up from the water, until Wapol and the rest of his men realize just who it is that they are, sailing towards. This would, of course, be the Storm Pirates, and of course their captain, who has a bounty of 100 million. Beginning to feel a little bit fearful, except for Wapol, who knows that Luffy probably won't kill him because he's a king, would basically tell him to, give him all of his belongings and everything of that sort. Luffy, not giving a single shit about this man's status, would simply just sink his ship with him along with it. And so, with that, Wapol and his entire crew, along with the doctors that he had on his ship, are dead. So they continue sailing forward towards the Drum Kingdom. And, of course, it wouldn't take them very long to arrive there, and they see the silhouettes of many people that are standing on the shore holding different kinds of weapons and things of that sort. And after arriving there, they would be basically yelling at them, telling them to leave, and their kingdom has had enough. And this is where Luffy would jump down towards the island and would land in front of all of these people. And he would basically be telling them and begging with them, like, please, we need to save our crew member. They would be saying that, you think we're going to believe you? You're just a pirate scum. And, of course, Luffy at this point is kind of starting to get pissed, but this is where Vivi would jump down next to him. She would bow her head and would basically be begging with them to please let them, talk to their doctors and try to help their friend out. Luffy would get down on his hands and knees as well, as he would lower his head to all of these villagers. They would be wondering what they're, going to do, but this is where Dalton would come out, and he would basically tell them that they will basically try to help her as best as they can, but they only really have one doctor left on this island, and she's kind of known somewhat as a bit of a witch. Luffy, of course, not really caring about what her reputation is, just wanting to know if she can do, like how good she is, would ask that question. Well, can she heal her? Is she good? And of course, he would say, she's the best doctor that we have ever had. Luffy, nodding at this point, would simply say that, well then where is she? How do we get there? And he would explain, as he points up to the top of the highest mountain, that she lives up there, in Wapple's old castle. Luffy, with the inquisitive look, would simply ask, Wapple? And after getting the explanation of who he is, he'd say, oh, I killed that guy just a little bit ago. At this point, Dalton would be like, you what? So yeah, they were trying to ransack our ship, and he was basically trying to use his, kingly, name, or like his reputation as a king, to make it so I wouldn't want to, have any, like, nobles or anything like that on my back, because they'd send stronger marines at me, but I didn't really care, so I just got rid of him. Dalton would thank Luffy over and over again for getting rid of somebody like that, and this is where Luffy would have Nami on his back, and would be running towards the mountain. He can't quite fly. He can kind of glide, but he can't really fly at the moment yet. And so we see him arrive towards the base of, I think they're called the Drum Rockies, I think is what they're called. And so he would infuse Haki into his hands, which he had finally been able to utilize, like, fully at this point. And he would begin digging his hands into the wall and would slowly start climbing up to the top. And after hours and hours of climbing, completely using up all of his Haki about halfway through and just climbing with his bare hands at that point, would finally arrive at the top of the mountain. And as he does so, he would begin to collapse down to the ground after reaching to the front of the castle, and this is where he gets spotted by a small creature that peeks his head through the door. And as he wakes up, he would be looking around wondering where exactly he is, and this is where the doctor would walk in. And Luffy asks if she is said doctor, the ones that the villagers had called a witch, and she would give a chuckle at that and says that indeed she is, and her name is Dr. Kureha. Luffy would ask if Nami is going to be okay, and she would ask him, she's going to be fine, yes, but where exactly were you guys to get something like that? And Luffy would explain the island that they just came from, Little Garden, which is basically like a prehistoric island, and she would chuckle at that and say that if he went anywhere else in the world, she would most likely be dead now, because that was a infection from long ago, from a species that was thought to be completely extinct. Luffy would be completely shocked by this and would thank her profusely and say that he'll give her anything for what she just did, and Kureha would smile at him and basically like this kid a little bit. Despite knowing exactly who he is, he did seem kind and caring. So this is where we'll see Luffy and Chopper meet for the first time, as we see Luffy wandering throughout the castle waiting for Nami to wake up. And we see Luffy walking up upon a little blue-nosed reindeer, whatever kind of creature he actually was. But Luffy, not really the one to judge, would ask if he was a doctor as well, because of where he was. Chopper would nervously nod his head while trying to hide behind a door, but he was on the wrong side of it. Luffy decides not to really mention this because it's kind of cute to look at, and he would thank him for helping his friend out as well. Chopper would nod a little bit reluctantly, still feeling very nervous around this man, not only knowing who he is, but also just because he's scared of humans in general, especially ones that could probably kill him in an instant if they really wanted to. And Luffy would simply ask him if he wants to join his crew because they've been needing a doctor. Chopper, completely shocked by this offer, would say that he's a monster and he can't be around humans like him. Luffy would look at him with a little bit of a weird look and say, if you're a monster, I wonder what that makes me. Chopper would ask what he means, and Luffy said, you ate a devil fruit, right? Chopper would nod, and Luffy would start having sparks around his hand, along with a little bit of water and wind, and he would say, yeah, me too. I've always gotten kind of weird looks from I guess what you could call normal people or civilians, that look at me and think that my powers are basically based on, like, devils and different things like that. I've gotten weird looks from a lot of different people, and I was lucky enough to find people that I can truly cherish and truly call my nakama, truly my friends. And Chopper would be kind of surprised by the sincere look that Luffy has in his eyes, but at the same time, he doesn't really, want necessarily to be a pirate at this moment. And so we see Luffy chasing around Chopper around the castle, basically trying to convince him to join, as they would run into a room where Nami was, as she would be waking up not too long ago, as she is with Kureha and just having a conversation. This is where Luffy and Chopper would run in one after the other, and they would basically be running around the room until Kureha and Nami at the same time would yell for them to stop. They are being really annoying. Both of them kind of submitted by the two different women for different reasons, as we both know, or all know, not both, I don't know what I said both for, but anyway, they would both basically submit down and be like, alright, I'll stop, and Nami would smile at Luffy and thank him for bringing her up here and helping her and saving her, because she got the explanation from Kureha that if they continued to go to where they were going, she would have been dead after a couple more days, or even another 2 days. And so, getting this explanation, she would realize just how much in debt she was to Luffy at this moment, and she would open up her arms and Luffy would give her a hug and would say it was nothing. I would do that for you over and over again. And Kureha also explained the state that Luffy arrived in, completely scuffed up on his hands and basically frozen because he was basically trying to protect her the entire time. And Nami would honestly be incredibly heartwarmed by this point. The rest of the Straw Hat crew would basically just kind of be chilling at this point with no Wapol around. There's not really going to be some big battle scene or anything of that sort. And so we see a couple of days would pass by. Nami is feeling a lot better and is able to walk around and do stuff, and she's had a couple of conversations with Chopper as well, and Chopper would explain that Luffy's basically just been trying to convince him to join his crew for the last couple of days. Nami would simply smile at him and say that he probably would enjoy being on their crew quite a lot. All of the different crew members are really weird in their own right, and he would fit in just fine. After a while of this kind of thing happening, Chopper would eventually agree to join them as he walks up to Kureha and would explain that he has made a choice and that he wants to join these pirates on their adventures. Kureha, obviously, not really being pissed, but trying to show that she was pissed and knowing that this was going to happen, would start chasing Chopper out. Chopper, grabbing a sled that was seemingly just prepared for him, would start running down, basically trying to figure out where he's going to go, until Luffy and Nami would jump out in front of him, and Luffy would grab both of them and would jump off over the edge. All of them would be screaming at this point, as Luffy would start simply gliding down towards his ship. And after arriving down there, after not too long, both of them screaming and cold the entire time, Luffy would simply be smiling and laughing the entire time. They would arrive down towards their ship, where they meet the rest of their crew, and after a little while, they would begin sailing out towards the ocean once again, as they all look back, and they see some cannons being fired from the top of the Drum Rockies. Specifically, from basically the giant castle that's at the top of it, as they see some what look a lot like pink blossoms falling down, making the entire island look like a massive, basically, cherry blossom tree. Chopper would be crying at this point while everybody would give him a little bit of time just to, observe what was going on around him, till Luffy would walk up to him and would grab him in his arms and would give him a big hug and basically say, well, welcome to the Storm Pirates crew, and we're all glad to have you. As Chopper would be mingling around with the crew, introducing himself and getting to know all of them, he would realize that all of them don't look at him in any strange way. All of them are genuinely happy that he is there and that he is going to be their doctor from this point forward. And so, after some more days of sailing and everybody just kind of getting along and mingling together with one another, they would eventually arrive at Alabasta. And of course, they would immediately see Luffy seemingly just disappear because he sensed something that he hasn't sensed in a very, very long time, and he's very excited by the prospect of seeing him once again, as we see Luffy run up and run into a bar, as he sees not only Smoker, but also the person that he wanted to see, his brother, Ace. And so, I'm going to have to leave this part off here because I have to go to work in like an hour and I still have to edit this and do all of that kind of stuff. So, I will see you guys in the next part. I'll make the next one longer and I'll see you guys later. Peace out. Bye.